Hi, welcome back. In this session, we are going to develop a REST service to fetch employee details from database. The use case here is if HR wants to fetch a specific employee details based on employee ID, then HR can use this service to fetch the employee details. So we are going to get a employee ID as query parameter. Then by using the query parameter, we will fetch the employee record from database. Then we'll respond back the response. And the URL that we are going to build is get employee and employee ID as a query parameter, which is of get method. And coming to the responses, we are going to respond back 200 OK, and the response should contain the employee record. Let's do this. I am going to create one more flow in EMP SAPI project. Right click here, new mule configuration file, and give it as get employee by ID. Click on finish. Let's drag and drop from HTTP module listener, and let's name it as get employee listener. And I am going to use same HTTP configuration that we used in previous sessions, and the path is going to be different from one to other, and the path is get-employee, and we will get one query parameter here. Let's put this. Let's introduce a logger as start log and say that started get employee by ID flow. Let's save it, and next drag and drop database select connector, and we are going to write select query here. Let's use the same database configuration we created. Now let's provide the query that would be select EMP ID, EMP name, EMP status from EMP, where EMP ID equal to give the named parameter EMP ID. And for this EMP ID, let's map this from the input parameter. Make sure we should be clicking on FX, and also should provide here the first braces. Let me remove this and put braces inside this. Give the named parameter, and I am going to provide it through attributes dot query params dot, and whatever the value we are going to get as a query parameter, that is employee ID. Let's copy it and put here. Let's save. So we are going to fetch employee ID, employee name, employee status from EMP table, where employee ID equal to whatever the value over we are getting as query parameter. If we have a look at database, here the database has 3 records. In this, whatever the value I send, that response will come. So here we have one important thing, that is always the database select operation returns us array of objects. Even though we are fetching one record, still it will come under a array. Now let's prepare the response. Drag and drop transform message and set it as set response. Save, and we are expecting the response as a JSON payload, that is employee ID, employee name, employee status as a JSON object. So let's do the same, As we discussed, always even though we fetch one record, that will come as a array. So we wanted to have the response as JSON, and we wanted to have it as employee ID, that would be payload of 0 dot emp underscore id. Why I am writing the payload of 0? Because the outcome of this database call will come as a array that contains emp id. Since we are fetching emp id, emp name, emp status, so those will come as a single array. While executing this, I will show you the database outcome that appears as array of single object that contains emp id, emp name, emp status. That is the reason I am writing here as payload of 0, because the array index always starts from 0, so that it will give us the first record. Next, employee name as payload of 0 dot emp name, comma should be there, and comma, and employee status as payload of 0 dot emp underscore status. Let's save it and let's add a end log here. Let's put as completed get employee flow. Let's save it and run this in debugging mode. The application has deployed. Let's go to Postman and make the request now. Request came, click on next, next, and we notice the response of payload is saying that size 1, and if we see this, that is as array. Let me show you in expression as payload. Evaluate. We can see the size as 1 and which is of array, or let me show you in this way, payload of 0. Evaluate. The payload of 0 has given us employee status, employee name, employee ID. If I want to get emp ID, then I should write emp ID. This will give the employee ID. That is the reason I have written this logic in the set response. Now click on next, next. We can see the response came for 100 employee as the expected response. Now let me send 101. Click on send. Now we got the response for 101 employee. Selecting data based on a ID. Then how about selecting all the employees from database without having any where condition? Let's see that now. Let's go to Endpoint Studio and create one more service to fetch all the employees instead of fetching one record. So let's go to Mule configuration file and give it as get employees. Click on finish. And now let's drag and drop a HTTP listener connector, and here I am going to use same HTTP listener configuration and path. If here I can show you, that is get employees, which is a get based, and we are expecting response as 200 OK, and the response should be array because there is a chance of having employee records more than one. In previous scenario we are fetching by ID, which is a primary key, so that we will always get one record. That is the reason we have used payload of 0. But now definitely even though we get one record, that should be responded back in a array because we are fetching all the employees, correct? So I am going to have the path as get employees. So even I made the same request prepared in the postman. Let me copy this get employees and go to studio, put the path here. Let's save and let's have a start log saying that the flow has started as a start log and started get employees flow. Let's save and let's introduce a database call here as a select operation, drag and drop, and let's put it as select employee. I am going to use same database configuration. This time no input, just write select emp id comma emp name comma emp status from emp. Save it. And now we need to prepare the array of employees object response. Array of employees object response. Then how we can do that? Here let's define the metadata which we want. The response we want is array of employee objects. So let's do the same. Click on define metadata. I have already stored that in a file under get employees response. Let me show you the response we are expecting. So this is the response we are expecting. I have saved this into a JSON file. Now let's create that metadata as get employees hyphen response, create type. Let's choose JSON and it will be an example, and browse the example file that we created, that is on desktop under employee folder, get employees response. So this is the metadata. Click on select, which is a array of fields. We configure the same response as a array here. Now we see it has populated. Let's drag and drop this array to this array, and we see here a map as generated. Basically from the database we are getting array of employee objects, correct? Then we wanted to respond back that as array of employee objects. So map is a keyword to our function to iterate over the array of objects like for loop. Now in this I am going to do the mapping. So click on employee ID, employee name, employee status, and employee ID. Now whenever we are looping in the first iteration, the payload of 01 will contain first object. In the second iteration, the payload 01 contains second object. In the third iteration, it will contain the third until the payload has number of objects. So let's copy this and put here dot emp id. We don't need to put now as payload of 0 because we already looping each record. So in each iteration we will get a record. So that is the reason we don't need to loop dot. So we don't need to keep payload of 0 underscore name, then payload 01 dot emp status, which we are getting from the database. Let's save it. Now let's change this to as set response, and let's introduce a end log saying that flow has completed. Let's put it as end log and say get employees flow has completed. Let's save it. Now let me run the project again. This time let me run the project. I quickly show you the response. Don't worry about this error. This database call not able to get the metadata. If it get the metadata, it would obviously shows here. Since it can't able to get the metadata, it was not loading. If the metadata can load here, we can directly drag and drop employee ID, employee name, employee status, so that this complete logic will be generated. But we can't able to do that due to some issue of about metadata. It can't able to fetch the required metadata as inbound. The application has deployed. Let's go to Postman and make the request now. It will get all the records which are available in the database. Now we can see the response came as array of each object. So this way we work with fetching all the records from the database. And the important takeaway is here about the map. Why we need map? Since we are fetching multiple records from the database, to form the required JSON object, we should loop it. In the first iteration, when this map will be executed 3 times because the payload size is 3. In the first iteration, the payload 01 contains the first record. In the second iteration, it will contain the second record. In the third iteration, it will contain the third iteration. Since the size is itself 3, it won't go inside one more time. Then the payload 01 will inject the employee ID, employee name, employee status in the each iteration, and each will be formed as a single object like this. In the first iteration, this has formed. In the second iteration, this has formed. In the third iteration, this has formed. So this way we fetch the multiple records from database. That's all about this session. See you in next session. Thank you. Happy learning.